Alright, let's talk about something we all know, or something we ought to know. The Canadian penny. That little copper-colored coin that used to jingle in our pockets and clog up our change jars. For over 150 years, it was just there. You'd find them under your car seat, in the washing machine, or dropped on the sidewalk. They were everywhere. And then suddenly, they weren't. The penny wasn't just a piece of money, it was a part of our national furniture. It was the lowest denominator, the starting point, the humble workhorse of Canadian currency that saw this country through Confederation, 2 world wars, and the invention of the BlackBerry. It's a story worth telling. Think about it. This tiny coin tells a massive story about Canada itself. It's a story of our ties to Britain, our love for the maple leaf, and our journey as a country. It's also a story about simple economics. When something costs more to make than it's worth, well, even Ottawa eventually has to do the math. The decision to get rid of the penny was a big deal. It was like telling Canadians to stop saying sorry or to give up on hockey. It felt strange, almost un-Canadian. But the story of its rise and fall is a classic Canadian tale, full of history, practicality, and just a little bit of nostalgia for a coin we love to complain about. The penny was more than just metal. It was the star of the take a penny, leave a penny tray at the corner store, a noble Canadian invention if there ever was one. It was the first coin kids would save in their piggy banks, dreaming of buying a mountain of candy. It was a symbol of thrift, of saving up, of small things adding up to something bigger. Every time you saw Queen Elizabeth II staring out from that tiny copper disc, you were holding a piece of our shared history. From its grand beginnings to its unceremonious retirement, the penny's journey is a reflection of Canada's own journey, from a British colony to a modern nation figuring out its place in the world. So, let's take a walk down memory lane. Let's dive into the history of this iconic piece of shrapnel. We'll look at why we needed it in the first place, how it changed over the years, and why it eventually had to go the way of the dodo bird. It's a story about kings and queens, about copper and steel, and about how a country decides that 1 cent just isn't worth the trouble anymore. It's the biography of the Canadian penny, a coin that, even in its absence, still holds a special place in the hearts and minds of Canadians. Because let's be honest, who among us hasn't kept a few of them stashed away, just in case? Before 1858, trying to buy anything in the province of Canada was a real headache. It was a mess. There was no single unified currency. Imagine going to the store and the cashier has to be a currency exchange expert. Your pockets would be a wild mix of coins and tokens from all over the place. You might have some British pounds, shillings, and pence. You might have some American dollars and cents. You could even have Spanish dollars or French coins floating around. It was organized chaos, but mostly just chaos. This made trade confusing and daily life complicated. How do you give proper change when you're dealing with 3 or 4 different monetary systems at once? This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a real problem for the economy. Merchants had to keep complicated conversion charts just to figure out what anything was worth. A farmer selling his goods might get paid in a mix of currencies, and then he'd have to figure out how to use that money to buy supplies. It slowed down trade and created a lot of arguments. The government of the province of Canada, which was just Ontario and Quebec back then, knew they had to do something. They needed a system that was simple, consistent, and most importantly, their own. They wanted to step out from under the thumb of the British pound sterling system. The solution they looked to was the decimal system. It was logical, easy to use, and our neighbors to the south were already using it with great success. The idea was simple. 100 cents make a dollar. No more weird calculations involving shillings and pence. But Britain wasn't too keen on the idea. They wanted their colonies to stick with the pound. For years, there was a tug-of-war between London and the Canadian politicians. The Canadians argued that aligning their currency with the American system just made sense because of all the cross-border trade. Finally, after a lot of back and forth, London gave in. So in 1858, the province of Canada officially adopted a decimal currency based on the dollar. This was a huge step towards creating a distinct Canadian identity. It was a declaration of economic independence, a way of saying, we're going to do things our way. The stage was now set for Canada to mint its own coins, including the star of our show, the 1 cent piece. This new coin would help standardize prices, simplify trade, and give the people of the province of Canada a currency they could finally call their own. The era of pocketfuls of mystery money was coming to an end. With the new decimal system in place, Canada needed coins, and in 1858, the very first Canadian 1-cent piece was born. But here's a funny bit of trivia. These first pennies weren't even made in Canada. They were minted by the Royal Mint in London, England. We didn't have our own mint yet. That wouldn't happen for another 50 years. So, our first truly Canadian coins were actually British imports. These coins were big, much larger and heavier than the penny we remember from our childhoods. They were about the size of a modern quarter, and they were made of 95% copper, which gave them a solid, hefty feel. You knew when you had one in your pocket. The design of this first penny was all about showing where our loyalties still lay. On the front, or the obverse if you want to be fancy, was a portrait of Queen Victoria. She was the reigning monarch at the time, and her image on the coin was a clear symbol of Canada's connection to the British Empire. The portrait showed a young Queen Victoria, crowned with a laurel wreath, looking very regal. The inscription around her read, Victoria Dei Gratia Regina, which is Latin for Victoria, by the grace of God, Queen. It was a classic traditional design that screamed British authority. The back of the coin, the reverse, was where the Canadian part came in. It featured a simple, elegant design of a vine of maple leaves encircling the words 1 cent and the year 1858. The maple leaf was already being used as a symbol for Canada, representing the land and its people. It was a subtle but important nod to our own identity. This combination of the British monarch on the front and a Canadian symbol on the back set a precedent that would last for the entire life of the penny. It was a perfect representation of Canada's status at the time, a self-governing colony with strong ties to the crown. These large cents were produced for the province of Canada until Confederation in 1867. They were a success. They helped to finally push out the confusing mix of other currencies and create a standardized monetary system. People quickly got used to the new decimal currency, and the penny became a fundamental part of everyday transactions. It was the first step in a long journey for Canadian coinage, establishing a design philosophy and a physical presence that would evolve over the next century and a half. That big, heavy copper coin was the grandfather of every penny that would ever end up in a Canadian piggy bank. When Canada became a country in 1867, we didn't immediately get a new penny. We had bigger things to worry about, like building a railway and figuring out how this whole Dominion thing was going to work. So we kept using the old province of Canada coins for a while. It wasn't until 1876 that the first penny for the new Dominion of Canada was minted. These new coins were still the same large size and made of copper, and they still featured Queen Victoria on the front. Her portrait was updated to show a more mature version of the Queen, but the message was the same. The Queen of England was also the Queen of Canada. Queen Victoria remained on the penny until her death in 1901. After her long and historic reign, it was time for a change. Her son, King Edward VII, took the throne, and his portrait appeared on our pennies starting in 1902. This tradition of featuring the reigning monarch on the front of our coins continued, cementing the penny as a symbol of our connection to the Commonwealth. When King Edward VII died in 1910, he was replaced on the penny by his son, King George V, starting in 1911. For many Canadians, the face on their money was the only way they knew what the king looked like. The reign of King George V saw some interesting times for the penny. He was the monarch on our coins during the First World War and the Roaring Twenties. His image stayed on the penny for a remarkable 25 years. Then came one of the most famous and short-lived chapters in royal history. After George V died in 1936, his son Edward VIII became king. The Royal Canadian Mint started preparing new coin designs with his portrait. But then, in a move that shocked the world, Edward VIII abdicated the throne to marry Wallis Simpson before any of his coins could be put into circulation in Canada. Because of this, no Canadian coins with his face were ever issued. This royal drama created a problem for the mint. King George VI, Edward's brother, was now on the throne. but they didn't have a new master die with his portrait ready for 1937. So, for the coins minted in late 1936, they kept using the old George V dies, but they put a tiny dot on the bottom of the reverse side to show they were actually made in 1937. This created the famous dot cent, one of the rarest and most valuable pennies in Canadian history. Eventually, the new dies arrived, and from 1937 until his death in 1952, the penny featured the portrait of King George VI. He saw us through the Second World War, a steady presence on our smallest coin. For the first 80 years of its life, the penny's reverse side was pretty, but maybe a little boring. It was that vine of maple leaves, gracefully wrapped around the words, 1 cent. It was nice, but it wasn't exactly a bold statement. That all changed in 1937. With the new portrait of King George VI going on the front, the government decided it was time to give the back of all our coins a modern-day facelift. This was a huge moment in Canadian design history. The goal was to create a set of coins that were distinctly and proudly Canadian, moving beyond the old-fashioned Victorian look. And boy, did they succeed. The Mint hired an artist named G.E. Kruger Gray to create the new designs, and what he came up with for the penny was pure genius. He got rid of the leafy vine and replaced it with a simple, elegant, and powerful image. 2 maple leaves on a single twig. This wasn't just any old drawing of maple leaves. It was a stylized, Art Deco-inspired design that was both modern and timeless. The leaves were detailed and realistic, yet they had a certain graphic punch. Below the leaves, the words 1 cent and Canada were written in a clean modern font. It was a masterpiece of minimalist design. This new maple leaf design instantly became an icon. It was so perfect, so quintessentially Canadian, that it remained on the penny, virtually unchanged, for the rest of the coin's existence. For over 75 years, from 1937 to 2012, that simple twig with 2 leaves was the symbol of the penny. It became one of the most recognizable pieces of Canadian imagery, right up there with the Mountie and the beaver. Generations of Canadians grew up with this design. It was the image we associated with our smallest unit of currency, a humble yet proud symbol of our nation's identity, found in the pocket of every single Canadian. The only significant change to this design came in 1967 for Canada's centennial. To celebrate 100 years of Confederation, the artist Alex Colville created a special set of commemorative coins. The penny for that year featured a rock dove in flight, a symbol of peace and spiritual life. It was a beautiful design, but it was only for 1 year. In 1968, we went right back to Kruger Gray's classic maple leaf twig. The fact that we returned to it so quickly shows just how beloved and perfect that design was. It had become more than just a picture on a coin. It was a part of our national heritage. For most of its life, the penny was known as the copper, and for good reason. It was made almost entirely of copper. But as the 20th century wore on, the price of copper started to go up. This led to a big change in 1920. The government decided to shrink the penny. The old large cent was retired, and a new, smaller penny was introduced. This is the penny we all remember, the one that's the same size as the American cent. It was still made of 95.5% copper, so it kept its nickname, but it was much cheaper to produce because it used less metal. This smaller size would stick around for the next 92 years. The first big test for the penny's composition came during the Second World War. Copper was a critical war material needed for shell casings and wiring. Using it to make pennies was a waste. So, in 1942, Canada made a drastic change. The penny was now made of a metal called tombak, which is mostly copper but with some zinc. To save even more metal, they changed the shape from a perfect circle to a 12-sided polygon. This made the 1942 and 1943 pennies unique. But by 1944, the government went even further. They switched to chrome-plated steel. This gave the pennies a shiny, silver-like appearance. People called them white cents, and they were a clear reminder that the country was in the middle of a war effort. After the war, things went back to normal, and the penny returned to its bronze composition in 1946. This lasted for decades, through the entire reign of Queen Elizabeth II, who first appeared on the coin in 1953. But by the 1990s, the price of copper was once again becoming a problem. It was getting to the point where the metal in the penny was worth more than 1 cent. To solve this, the mint started experimenting. In 1997, they switched the composition to copper-plated zinc. This made the pennies much lighter. If you have a mix of pennies from before and after 1997, you can feel the difference. The older ones are noticeably heavier, but the cost-saving measures didn't stop there. In 2000, the Royal Canadian Mint made the final and most dramatic change. They switched to a core of steel with just a thin layer of copper plating on the outside. This made the penny magnetic for the first time in its history. You could pick them up with a magnet, which became a fun little party trick. This move made the penny incredibly cheap to produce, but it was also a sign of the times. The penny's value had dropped so low that it was now being made of the cheapest materials possible. A steel slug with a whisper of copper on top. The age of the true copper was long gone. For more than a century, the penny was woven into the fabric of Canadian daily life. It was more than just currency. It was a cultural touchstone. Every Canadian, from a kid with an allowance to a senior citizen, handled pennies on a regular basis. Prices in stores were listed down to the cent. Think of it: $1.99, $4.97, $9.95. Those prices were designed to make you think you were paying less, and they all depended on the existence of the humble penny to make change. The penny was the grease in the wheels of retail commerce, the tiny coin that made our pricing psychology work. It was the reason cashiers were always asking, "Do you have a cent?" The penny was also central to the Canadian spirit of community and charity. Those little take a penny, leave a penny trays next to cash registers were a uniquely Canadian phenomenon. They were a small-scale, anonymous system of mutual support. If you were a few cents short, you could take one. If you had extra, you could leave one for the next person. It was a simple act of kindness, repeated millions of times a day across the country. And what about charity donation boxes? They were almost always filled with pennies. School fundraising drives, church collection plates, and charity jars in coffee shops all relied on the accumulation of these low-value coins to make a real difference. Beyond its use in commerce and charity, the penny was a collector's item for the average person. We all did it. We had a jar, a bottle, or an old coffee can where we would dump our pocket change at the end of the day. Over time, that jar would fill up with hundreds, even thousands of pennies. It was a simple, passive way to save money. Every so often, you'd take your massive collection to the bank and feel like you'd won the lottery when they counted it all up. For kids, the piggy bank was the first introduction to the concept of saving, and it was almost always filled with pennies given as an allowance or found on the ground. The penny also had its place in our folklore and superstitions. Find a penny, pick it up, all the day you'll have good luck. How many of us bent down to pick up a grimy penny from the pavement just in case? It was a symbol of good fortune, of small blessings. It was used to scratch lottery tickets, to make decisions with a coin toss, or even as a makeshift screwdriver for tiny screws. The penny was versatile. It was a part of our language, our habits, and our homes. It was the most common and in some ways the most Canadian of all our coins. By the early 2000s, our little copper friend was in big trouble. The penny, once the workhorse of our economy, had become a nuisance. Its purchasing power had eroded to almost nothing. Think about it. Back in 1858, a penny could buy you a newspaper or a loaf of bread. By 2010, you couldn't buy anything with a single penny. You couldn't even use it in most vending machines. Its only real purpose was to make change for cash transactions, and even that was becoming a hassle. People would get a handful of pennies back and just stuff them in a pocket or a jar, where they would sit, forgotten and out of circulation. The biggest argument against the penny was its cost. Remember that switch to copper-plated steel? Even with that cost-saving measure, by 2011, it was costing the Royal Canadian Mint 1.6 cents to produce and distribute every 1-cent coin. That's right, it cost more to make the penny than it was actually worth. Every year, the government was losing millions of dollars just to keep these tiny, increasingly useless coins in circulation. From a purely economic standpoint, it was a terrible deal for taxpayers. The mint was basically taking a loss on every single penny it shipped out the door. Businesses were also getting tired of the penny. For retailers, handling pennies was a time-consuming and expensive process. They had to be counted, rolled, and taken to the bank, which took up employee time that could have been spent on other tasks. The weight of all those pennies also added to transportation and storage costs. Some businesses started rounding cash transactions to the nearest 5 cents on their own, just to avoid the hassle. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business and other groups began to publicly call for the elimination of the penny, arguing that it was an unnecessary burden on the economy. On top of the economic arguments, there were environmental concerns. Mining the metal, minting the coins, and transporting them all over this massive country has an environmental footprint. Doing all of that for a coin that had so little value seemed wasteful. Studies were done, reports were written, and the debate raged on. Some people were nostalgic and didn't want to see the penny go. But the evidence was overwhelming. The penny was costing the country money, wasting time, and serving very little purpose. The writing was on the wall. The time had come for Canada to make a decision about the future of its smallest coin. The final decision came down in the 2012 federal budget. On March 29, 2012, Finance Minister Jim Flaherty stood up and announced that the Canadian government would be eliminating the penny. The reasons were clear and simple. It cost too much to make, it was a hassle for businesses, and it had lost its value. The government estimated that getting rid of the penny would save taxpayers about $11 million a year. The announcement marked the end of an era. After 154 years, the Canadian penny was being officially retired. It was a practical decision, but for many, it was also a sad one. The Royal Canadian Mint struck the very last penny for circulation on May 4, 2012, at its facility in Winnipeg. It was a symbolic moment. The final coin was specially marked and later entrusted to the Bank of Canada Museum in Ottawa. After that, the Mint stopped distributing pennies to financial institutions on February 4, 2013. That was the official end date. From that day forward, no new pennies would enter circulation. The ones that were already out there could still be used, and you could still take them to the bank to deposit them, but they would no longer be given back as change. The penny was officially a ghost. So what happened next? The government introduced rounding rules for cash transactions. If you were paying with cash, the final total, after taxes, would be rounded to the nearest 5 cents. If a bill came to $9.97, you'd pay $9.95. If it came to $9.98, you'd pay $10. It was simple and symmetrical. Importantly, this rounding only applied to cash. If you paid with a debit card, credit card, or check, the transaction would still be for the exact amount. Many people were worried this would lead to secret price increases, but studies showed that the rounding was fair and had no real impact on inflation. Life, it turned out, could go on without the penny. Today, the penny lives on in our memory and in our coin collections. While most pennies are only worth their face value, or maybe their scrap metal value, some are highly sought after by collectors. The 1936 cent is the holy grail, worth a fortune. Pennies from the 1920s, especially 1923 and 1925, are also very valuable. Even certain modern pennies with small errors or variations can be worth more than 1 cent. The end of the penny sparked a new wave of interest in coin collecting, as many Canadians started sifting through their change jars, looking for rare treasures. The penny may be gone from our pockets, but it has found a new life as a piece of history, a reminder of a time when 1 cent really meant something. It's a small coin that tells a big story about Canada,